Have you ever heard a story so chilling that it made you question reality? What if you found out that the most terrifying part of the story was that it actually happened? Imagine being trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by the restless spirits of those who died in a tragic accident. What would you do if you suddenly realized you were on a bus full of the dead? In tonight's story, we dive into a terrifying event from my past. A deadly crash. A ghostly bus ride. And a mystery that haunts me to this day. Could I have been destined to relive this horrifying moment that happened before I was even born? Stay with me, and decide for yourself if this was just a coincidence, or something far more sinister. For years, my parents had told me about the tragic bus crash that took place near our house long ago. One morning, just days before I was born, my mother was out in the garden pulling weeds when she heard a terrible noise. First, high-pitched screams, then the screeching of tires, followed by a massive crash. Everyone in the neighborhood rushed out of their homes to see what had happened. Down at the bottom of the old coach road, black tire marks led to a nearby cliff. When they reached the edge, they saw the wreckage of a bus down below, having plunged straight off the cliff onto jagged rocks. The people ran down to the wreckage, desperate to help the survivors, only to discover that it was the local school bus, filled with their own children. The bodies of the kids lay intertwined with the twisted metal. Some had been thrown from the bus as it fell, their bodies shattered on the rocks. Others were decapitated by glass and metal inside the bus. Parents screamed and sobbed as they found the remains of their sons and daughters in the charred debris. When emergency services arrived, they confirmed the worst: there were no survivors. Every child on the bus had perished, marking the most horrifying disaster the area had ever seen. In one brutal moment, an entire generation was wiped out. The grief of the parents was unimaginable. A few days later, a mass funeral was held for all the children. People traveled from far and wide to mourn. Almost every family had lost a child, some even 2 or 3. Nearly 40 small coffins were lowered into the ground that day. An investigation soon revealed the cause of the crash. A mental patient from the local asylum had escaped the night before. He had broken into the bus station, stolen a driver's uniform, and waited until the doors opened the next morning. Then, he boarded the school bus and picked up the children as usual, without raising suspicion. Once the bus was full, he sped toward the cliff and drove off. The community never forgot that horrible accident. Growing up, I had very few children to play with, most of them had died in that crash. The only kids left were those too young to attend school at the time. The story I'm about to tell takes place when I was 13. My parents let me go to the movies in town. I met up with friends, and we had a great time, but we lost track of time. By the time I got to the bus stop, I realized I'd missed the last bus. Frustrated, I thought about walking home, but the roads were dangerous at night, with no streetlights to guide me. I found a payphone and called home. My mother answered, and when I told her I'd missed the bus, she panicked. My dad had taken the car, and she couldn't pick me up. She begged me not to walk home, as the roads were too treacherous at night, especially since it had started snowing. After waiting impatiently, I decided to walk home anyway. As I made my way along the dark, lonely road, headlights appeared behind me. The vehicle moved quickly and silently through the snow. As it got closer, I realized it was a bus. I waved frantically, hoping the driver would see me. The bus sped past, but then, to my relief, it stopped a short distance ahead. I ran up to the door, which swung open as I approached. Once inside, the door slammed shut, and the bus sped off again. It was dark inside, but I could make out that it was nearly full. I took a seat, exhausted. The atmosphere was icy cold, and a strange, unpleasant smell filled the air. I glanced around at the other passengers, all silent and staring straight ahead. Their stillness and the overpowering stench were deeply unsettling. I turned to the boy next to me and asked if I could open the window. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. I asked again, louder this time, but still no answer. I tried opening the window myself, but the latch broke off in my hand. I noticed the window was covered in cobwebs and mildew. The entire bus seemed old and decayed, the seats were moldy, and the floor was crumbling. I turned back to the boy, asking, "What's wrong with this bus?" He slowly turned to look at me, and I'll never forget the sight. His eyes were wide, his face pale and leathery like a corpse. His lips were pulled back, revealing yellow teeth. Terror gripped me as I realized everyone on the bus was staring at me with the same ghastly expression. Their faces were rotting, their clothes filthy. The only part of them that seemed alive were their eyes, those terrible, piercing eyes. I screamed and ran to the door, trying to escape. Just as the door opened, I heard a thunderous crash, and the bus shook violently. I heard the screams of children, and a sharp pain shot through my body before everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, my mother by my side. She told me I'd fallen off a cliff near the old coach road but had survived thanks to a deep snowdrift. I was found at dawn by a farmer, with 2 broken legs, a broken arm, and a deep cut on my forehead. The place where I fell, she told me, was the same spot where the school bus had crashed 13 years before. Now, you can believe whatever you want, but I know that 13 years ago, just before I was born, I was somehow on that doomed bus.